Hi there. Welcome to End-to-End Solution Architect session. Today I will be talking about how can we create EKS Fargate deployment using CloudFormation. So basically I will be focusing on this particular architecture. Well, so where we will deploy a CloudFormation template which will create the EKS cluster, and also it will create the Fargate profile. And you will also see that how we will be able to connect private subnets with the NAT gateway. In the CloudFormation template, I have the NAT gateway creation template as well. So basically, since our Fargate profile will be deployed in private subnet, so whenever we will want to pull the nginx image. Basically, this is the sample I will be using for deploying the nginx image. Okay, so I will be pulling from the Docker Hub repository, and that is a public repository. So from private subnet, definitely we will not get access to the public repositories, and we will need the NAT gateway. So there will be the configuration in the CloudFormation template that the NAT gateway will be created or hosted in a public subnet. The route table will be configured, and the traffic from private subnet will be routed through this NAT gateway to get the public repository access to pull the images. Well, so as you see this architecture, there is also one more point where it is basically the Bastion host we are creating, because I, as a user, will be logged in or accessing this Bastion host. It is nothing but a simple EC2 instance. And from that EC2 instance, we will be configuring kubectl, which will basically do all the operations to manage this EKS cluster. Okay, so there will be two templates. Basically, one template will be creating this Bastion host, and another template we will create the rest of it, means the EKS cluster, then creating the Fargate profile, creating and configuring the NAT gateway. And definitely as a parameter, we will be passing the availability zones, your public subnets, VPC, these network constructs we will be passing. Well, there will be a small part for the CloudWatch as well, and definitely the IAM role and the permission will play a vital role in this architecture. I will share each and every steps one by one. Well, so if you are watching this tutorial, I will share this a link. Basically, it is the documentation to create and manage EKS cluster Fargate. Okay, you will find every step starting from scratch. If you are very beginner or intermediate or even advanced, these steps in very detail I have drafted over here, and it will be very helpful for you. One more thing I want to emphasize over here, that it is not that I will show you how simply or how happily that you are able to create this EKS cluster or the Fargate profile. Okay, but I will also guide you on the frequently experienced issues or error, and what are the points you have to keep in mind. So as I'm sharing this thing as attention, that these are the pointers I will explain one by one that you have to keep in mind. So if you scroll down, you will get each and every steps sequentially with their input, output, command, template, each and everything you will find. So following this documentation, you will be able to create the EKS cluster from the scratch. Will be able to manage the EKS cluster and deploy the pod definitely. If you have any queries anytime, and if you need any technical help, technical assistance, then definitely you can contact us by dropping an email to contact us at e2esolutionarchitect.com. You can book and one-on-one meeting for any technical problem solving, to get advice from subject matter experts for any suggestion on job search, career guidance, certification and training advice. And if you are setting up your very small business, for IT setup, you need any advice, definitely you can contact us. Well, let's start from the beginning. Then the very first step is that create the EKS cluster with Fargate profile. This is our agenda, right? Now here, please refer here for the CloudFormation template. So it is the very ready-made template. I have shared it over here. So it is publicly accessible. So I'm just opening it to give you a glance. And then I will create this, the CloudFormation stack using this template. Okay, as you see over here, I'm not going step by step because CloudFormation, I hope and assume that you understand what is called CloudFormation. And this is whatever is coded over here, it is exactly the architecture I have explained over here. Okay, the graphically. So we can utilize the time to deploy this CloudFormation template and see how it is working. Okay, so I am logged into my AWS console. I clicked over this CloudFormation, or just you can just search the CloudFormation and go to CloudFormation. Here I am at the CloudFormation. There is no stack currently deployed. So I'm clicking on create stack and simply uploading that template file. So in this case, I have the default value attached with the template file, but the template which is publicly shared, definitely it doesn't have that actual values, but you will be selecting as per your VPC, your subnet and all other networking details. So it will not bother you that you don't have the value from this side. Okay, so I'm selecting that template from my computer and just uploading it over here. So as you see that I have my file cfcluster.yml and it has uploaded. So once I click on next, it will validate that. Here I have the values already selected. So control plane subnet A, control plane subnet B. These are basically two subnets, public subnets, where the EKS cluster will be deployed. Okay. And then you see that Fargate profile, private subnet 1, Fargate profile, private subnet 2. This is for the Fargate profile. Here in the namespace, you have to make sure that you are providing the same namespace as your pod will be deployed. Okay, so once you will be deploying your pod, definitely you will be creating the namespace, and that namespace should match with this Fargate profile. Okay, and your VPC should be selected over here. Well, so simply I'm clicking on next. Okay, simply scroll down, click over next, scroll down, and it has initiated. Okay, meanwhile, let me go back to the documentation once again. So we have completed the first one and the first pointer as well. So here it says that namespace should match with the pod namespace. In our case, we will be deploying the nginx in the pod. So the namespace we will be creating actually by name nginx. That's why I provided the name nginx in the Fargate profile. Okay. Second thing to keep it in mind that private subnet is required for Fargate profile. So you have seen in the CloudFormation template that I have mentioned two private subnets. Okay, so if you don't have the private subnet, so you will not be able to create the Fargate profile. Okay, so make sure that before creating your cluster or Fargate profile, you have the private subnet configured. Okay, now the next thing is if you are pulling an image from public repository, definitely in our case, we will be pulling the nginx from Docker Hub, and that is a public repository. Make sure that you have the NAT gateway. Okay, so in our case, we have the NAT gateway in the CloudFormation template. Now over here, let me share my screen. Well, so here is the NAT gateway part. Okay, so in the same CloudFormation template, CF cluster, in my case at least, and in the Git repository as well, you will find that here is the NAT gateway we are creating, and we are also creating an elastic IP, and we are assigning to the root table. Here are the stuff. So you do not need to create or but think of creating it because it is in the template. Okay, so if I show you in the same publicly hosted here, so you will also find the NAT gateway in this Fargate EKS Fargate profile template. Now let's go back and see that how far it is done. Well, so it is saying that for some reason it has failed. So let's see that what happened over here. So it's saying that EKS pod execution role. Okay, so in this case, it found that this role already exists, and the CloudFormation template actually tried to um, provision that again. Okay, because I tried this template before, that's the reason. So meanwhile, let me do it that quickly. Let me delete this role, and or we will initiate this again. So meanwhile, let me delete this whole stack. And as I said that I will show you all the troubleshooting. Okay, so you will understand that what kind of issues you may face. So in my case, but definitely this issue you will not get, because in my case I used the template before and I didn't delete this particular role, I remember. Okay, so I'll be just deleting this role and come back, and we'll re-execute the template once again. Okay, so I have removed the role, and by this time the stack is also completely deleted. Okay, so I can give a try again, selecting the template once more, clicking next, acknowledge, click on submit, and it has started creating. Okay, so let's go back to our documentation once again. So but we have completed that the attention part. And the last point, after nginx deployment, if pods are not running because of CloudWatch log group, please check the troubleshooting reference below. So I have also mentioned the troubleshooting this but errors or issues you may face. So if you open this link, which is troubleshoot basically of Kubernetes, so you will get all these error or issues and their fixes also over here. Okay, so you will get, you see that pods are not working, or pods are not running, still showing pending. So what are the things you have to keep in mind, and basically what you need to do. Let's go back to our CloudFormation and see how it is going. Okay, it is going good. It is creating the control plane. That's fine. These parts are done. Let's go back to our documentation and follow the next step. Because our cluster is being created by the CloudFormation template, so we can move to the next, which is basically creating the Bastion host. So it is nothing but creating an EC2 to manage and configure the cluster. Okay, so again, I have the CloudFormation template. So if you click over here, you will find the whole EC2 thing. So how this can be done. Here you see that installing the kubectl AWS configure, everything is in the user data over here. So quickly showing you over here that in the user data part, we will be running automatically this script. So it will be completing few basic stuff. We'll be updating but the instance, will be installing the unzip, will be actually installing the AWS CLI2, will be again installing kubectl, this part, all these things. Okay, so simply what we have to do, that we will run one more CloudFormation template. So it is basically clicking over here, create stack once more, and selecting and uploading the second template for creating the VM. This is our CF VM, VM01. Just scrolling down, click on next. So we have currently two stacks are being created. So our cluster, it takes around 10 minutes, and the virtual machine or the Bastion host basically will be created in a minute. Okay, so it has started. But again, go back to our documentation. Always refer this documentation because it has every steps. Okay, so now our next steps is basically the install kubectl. Now, as I showed that in our user data, we are already installing this kubectl. But in your case, if you are not using this template or you don't have the kubectl already installed like this, what you can do that you can follow these steps over here if not installed already using our cf template. So you can click on this link over here and you will get all the details of the commands on the steps, basically how to install kubectl. As you see over here that it is from the AWS documentation, the steps are in very short. I have drafted these steps, but if you need in more detail, definitely you can go to the AWS documentation. Okay, so I'm going back again. Please refer the troubleshoot here when needed. So this is a very handy troubleshoot link I have provided that any kind of issues or technical challenges you face for deploying or creating this EKS cluster and the pods, you can refer this documentation for the fixes and the resolution. Okay. Now again going back and configure AWS. Okay. So in our case, again, it has the script for configuring AWS. Okay, CLI we are installing over here. So once we will connect to our instance, the first thing we will do is installing, basically configuring our AWS configure. Now, the user you will be using, that is a crucial thing that the user basically you will be configuring for AWS configure from your Bastion host definitely should have that EKS access, okay, from your IAM role. Here in my case, the user I'm using, it has the administrator role, but additionally, please note that for STS, I have this permission attached. So I will show you that to call the STS, you need to have this STS assume role policy attached. Okay, and as you see that this STS is basically attached with another role. So I'm copying this role. It is a custom role created and going to that role. For managing your EKS cluster, it should have these permissions listed over here. Okay, and you see that STS permissions also over here. So I have the STS permission. It is wide open, but definitely I don't recommend. But since it is just a POC thing, not a production level, so that's why I have used it, the wildcard operator and wide open for every resources. Okay, now let's go back to our CloudFormation and see that how far we are. So see that the VM has been completed and it is still working. The root NAT gateway done and EKS Fargate profile is also working. It is still in progress. Okay, but the good thing is that we have the VM done, so we can open the EC2 instance. EC2, and I'm just opening the EC2 in a separate tab. Well, here I have the EC2 dashboard and I have one instance running because that is the instance I have created. Connecting this EC2 instance with this connect to instance, this profile. Since it is Ubuntu, so our username is Ubuntu. This is our public IP address. Click on connect. Well, here I am connected to the instance I have created. Now, first thing is that let's see that whatever we tried to install through this. So whether it is created successfully installed or not. Okay, so we can do just kubectl version, okay, to check that whether it has executed the last installing kubectl or not. Okay, so by this way you can test. So just copying and pasting over here. Okay, so it says that the version is like this. So it has executed successfully. Okay, now our first step will be configuring AWS configure. Now I will be using my key and secret ID, so I will avoid that thing to share in this tutorial. So here is basically AWS configure, because we have the AWS CLI already installed. Okay, so once I click over here, it will ask me for the key ID, and once I enter the key ID, it will ask me for the secret, like this. So I will add this ID and the secret, and we'll create the screen and we'll start tutorial again. Okay, so I'm pausing it for a minute. One quick thing is that if you don't have the access key created, or basically you don't have that key and the secret key, so you go to IAM, select your user, and click over here that create access key. Okay, and select the command line interface CLI. Okay, confirm, click on next. So it is asking for a tag value only, optional. So you can create access key. And here is the key and the secret key. So you should copy it safely. Okay, because otherwise it will not show you again. So better you download the .csv file. It will have the access key and secret access key. Okay, and click on done. But I have configured the AWS configure with the access key and secret key. Well, so I'll show you that how you can basically check that which user is connected, means for which user you have configured this key. So if you run this, the AWS STS get caller identity and click enter, it will show you the user ID, account, and the ARM. And the last part of is basically which I am currently hiding, because it is showing that which user, my user I'm connecting, but it will show you over here. Now I'm clearing the screen and going back to our documentation. So here you see that till this part we are here that we have verified the user configured via use AWS configure. Now we know that by which user we will be doing the operations for our EKS. Okay, because this is the user, you need to have that particular role I have just showed you. Okay, because this user should have the privileges to connect to the EKS, this thing. So you need to be very careful that the user actually you are configuring in your Bastion host should have the proper permissions and the role. Well, let's go to next, because this is the output for STS get caller identity. Okay, so user ID, account, and the ERN you will find. Here you will have your account ID, and then you colon user, and this is your user, means actual username will be there. Okay, now our next part is create or update a kubeconfig file for your cluster. So we have the kubectl install. So what we will do, we'll just copying this command, going back to the ECS console where we are connected. I'm pasting this command over here. And before that, let's check that how far we are for the cluster creation. And we should be good. Okay, we see that the cluster has been created successfully. Okay, so everything fine. Let's go to our EKS and let's see how it has created. So opening that Elastic Kubernetes services. And we see that we have our cluster name cluster 01. It is active. Kubernetes version 1.27. All came from the cloud formation template. You do not need to worry about that. Once you go through the cloud formation template, you will find every details over here. So we have this overview resources. Let's go to the resources. By default there are two pods. Okay, then go to the replica set. By default one replica set. There should be one deployment. Yes. Okay, we have not installed or deployed our pod here. So you go to the compute part, and here, since we are using that Fargate profile over here and not the node groups. Okay, and you know that the difference between the node groups and Fargate profile, because Fargate is completely managed by AWS. Okay, and node groups are you are adding the EC2 instances. So it is basically we have used the Fargate, which was initially launched for the ECS. Okay, Fargate is a deployment type. Means once you deploy your containers, so how you want to manage it? You want to manage yourself, then you use the EC2 instances, or you want AWS to manage it. So completely a managed service. So that is called the Fargate profile. Now you see that in Fargate profiles, you can add multiple Fargate profile over here. In our case, we have added only one Fargate profile because we have the one type of deployment, that is a nginx. But if you have suppose multiple applications and you want to deploy multiple applications in multiple separate namespaces but under a same cluster in the different Fargate profile, then you understand the design how you can create the Fargate profile for multiple namespaces for separate applications over here. So if I click on the Fargate profile, it will show the subnets. Basically, as I said, that these are the private subnets. Okay, and the pod selector. Okay, it is the key value pair, the namespace. So as I said, the namespace name of the Fargate profile should match with the pod deployment. Okay, and there is a tag. It is optional, you can give it or not. Okay, but good practice is to add the tags over here. So we have our cluster created and our cluster name is cluster 01. So again, go back to this, what it's we need to do here. We have to put our cluster name. So this is something, once you can run this command, once your cluster is successfully created, it's green. Okay, now only it can connect to the cluster. So clicked over that and it's showing that added new context. Okay, for that particular cluster. So our the context has been added. Okay, now the next part is check kubectl config. Okay, here just it is the verifying that kubectl config view. Okay, you can run it or not, just to verify that how the kubectl config has been added when it added the context. I'm not going into that, but we have to do some configuration for accessibility, and that is called that since I am using one IAM user to connect and manage the EKS cluster, we have to do some RBAC, so role-based access management thing. Okay, so you can copy this, which is basically it will download a template provided by AWS from their S3. Okay, let me show you step by step. Let me clear this. Okay, so simply paste this. It is doing wget and downloading this. Okay, so here let me clear the screen again, and if I do this ls, I am getting this thing. Now what do you have to do, that run this command, which is basically what the YML, the full access EKS console access. So what is this YML is basically that it has all the necessary configuration for providing the my user for the EKS console full access YML. Okay, so here we are applying this YML. So copy this and just simply paste it over here and see what it says, and it will say that it has created. Okay, so necessary things it has created. But basically, if I want to show you that what is inside this EKS control profile, so just doing a VI, and you will see that it has the configuration for the resources, API groups, all the accesses. Basically, it is the full access for the EKS cluster. Now, definitely when you are deploying it in production, you should not give the full access, but here is the configuration file which you can create the groups and you can tight the accesses. So I am just closing it over here and clearing the screen. Once again, let's go back. Okay. Now, what we have to do here is the output I have pasted over here. Okay, and two troubleshooting points also. So if you get any error like that showing it is not authorized to perform assume row STS assume role. Okay, so you know that I have showed you that STS permission how you have to add this as a policy. Okay, so again going back to the documentation, and this is the output basically what I am doing and getting the output starting from this kube config. Okay, but at this point till now we have completed this applying this YML means the full access YML. Now our next thing is that we have to do this config map. We have to update the config map. So let me create copy this command. So it is basically you see kubectl edit config map AWS auth for the cube system. Now once we will edit this, it will open the template like this. Okay, very simply like this. What we have to do, we have to add our user. In my case, I have to add my user. So I am telling this configuration that my user, basically the name of the user from here and from which account. Okay, this part, and we should have these groups. Okay, and based on that, from this instance, my user will be able to connect and manage the EKS cluster. That is the purpose. Okay, so simply I'm going back to this and copying this config map, going to this EC2 instance, pasting this, simply enter. Okay, now it has entered here. Just at the kind, click I because it will open the insert mode, and we have to paste. You have to first form this part because you know your username. You have to add your username, you have to add your account number, and you have to add your username over here too. Okay, so here in this case I will be copying this part and following as per my username, and will be updating that config map. Well, now it has opened and you see that I have added particularly this map user part. Okay, so once you open it, it will not have the map user but the rest of the configuration. Now if you want to add multiple user, you can just copy this part starting from the user ARN, username, and the groups, and you can add. And you particularly see that the groups we have, it is system bootstrappers, system masters, system nodes, and EKS console dashboard full access group. Okay, so now I am just closing this. So it is escape colon qw and pipe. Sorry, it was escape colon wq and pipe. In the documentation, if you see, so particularly what we have added over here, that this is the part we added. So you will add your IAM username. Here also IAM username and the AWS account number. Okay, and if you want to add multiple users for this, so you will add another set of user ARN, username, and the groups. Okay, but once you open the edit of config map, you will actually find the whole configuration as it is showing over here, except this map user part. Okay, so this part is done. So it means that we have completed the role-based access control. So it means that at least we have completed the accessibility part. So we can connect our EKS cluster from the Bastion host we have created. Okay, now this is a time we test whether our Bastion host is able to connect and get the information from our cluster or not. Okay, so I have just copied this kubectl get svc and opening the EC2 console over here, pasting it, running this kubectl get svc, and you see that it is showing Kubernetes cluster IP. This is the cluster. So we are able to get that. And if I open the cluster over here, that we have our cluster and the Fargate profile already created. So this is our cluster, as you see, cluster 01, and we have our by default 2 pods um, created. So these are the default pods at this moment. Okay. And let's go back to our EC2 instance. Okay, to the documentation, because this is the time we will be actually deploying the pod for nginx, right? So scrolling down, and here you see that, okay, even before deploying this thing, let's copy this EKSCTL get cluster. And if you run this EKSCTL get cluster, let me make it this way and pasting this. So it will basically get clusters information from the region US East 1. Currently my cluster is in US East 1 and it is the only cluster. So if you have multiple cluster, you will get all the information accordingly. You see that the cluster name is cluster 01 US East and it is showing EKSCTL created false because I have created it through CloudFormation script. But if you are using EKSCTL commands to create a cluster, so it would show the EKSCTL created true. It doesn't matter for us. Well, now let's go to our deployment. So here I have shared the template. Let me open the template once again. Here in this pod deployment template, we'll be basically deploying the nginx. Okay, so I have this same namespace nginx created. The namespace I used during our cluster creation for the Fargate profile. Okay, this is very important. You have to keep the same namespace. Okay, so namespace of the Fargate profile and namespace of your deployment must match. That's fine. Now scrolling down this part, and you see that we are pulling this nginx from the Docker Hub public repository. Okay, but one thing is that, as I said it before, that our Fargate profile is actually in the private subnet. So there is no internet gateway. That's why we had to create the NAT gateway, which is actually pointing to the private subnet, but NAT gateway is actually hosted in public subnet. Okay, so if you go to the route table, basically, that here you have to configure it properly. So in my case, there's 2 subnets are private subnets. So I have attached it or associated these 2 subnets in the private route table. And if you go to the detail part of that private route table, why we call it private route table? Because it doesn't have the internet gateway attached. There is no status which says that it is public or private. So it means that if internet gateway attached, it is public. If internet gateway is not attached, then it's private. Okay. In our case, if you go to that routes, you will find that we have the local routes and the target is NAT gateway. Okay. Because this NAT gateway is actually created in public subnet, but associated in the private route table. So from the private route table, the private subnets can route their traffic through this NAT gateway. Okay. So let's go back again to the documentation, and it says that, okay, now we have to deploy this YML, and I have showed this YML just now. Okay. So I will copy the YML from my local system, the same YML basically, and I will create one deployment file. Basically, you can give any name. So it is vi deployment.yml, and I will paste that YML. So I have pasted it over here. This is the same YML I have just showed. Everything configured, means the nginx pod deployment. I'm just closing it. Perfect. Now this is the time we will run the deploy. So deploy is basically kubectl apply -f. F means file we are referring, and this is our file. It can be abc.yml, whatever the name you prefer. It doesn't matter. Okay. So I'm going back here, just pasting it here. Okay. And click enter. And it's showing that it has created namespace. It has created config map for AWS logging, deployment.apps deployed, and service also created. Okay. Now we have to see that the status of the pods. To know the status of the pods, so I copied this kubectl get pods, and let's run this and see what's going on. Well, at this moment, it is showing that 3 nginx pods are still pending. Okay, now if you are wondering why this 3 nginx pod, so let me take you to this part, the pod deployment, where we have mentioned that this the replica is number 3. That's the reason it is creating 3 pods over here. Now, if I take you to the cluster basically and give a refresh, currently you see 2 pods by default. Now we see that the new 3 pods. Okay, and it has just created. So if I click over this pod and scroll down, you find that it started and successfully pulled the image nginx latest. So you also understood that it has successfully pulled because it was able to pull the image through the NAT gateway. Okay, and created container, started container nginx. Perfect. So let's go back to our console over here, EC2 console, and give a run, and we see that these 3 nginx pods are running one by one and completely running. Well, so this is a very overall but a complete end-to-end thing, that how you can create the EKS cluster, create the Fargate profile, and deploy the pod. Okay, so you can change the image specification basically, and you can use that same script to deploy any image in the same architecture. So I am again going back to this documentation. As you see that we have the architecture where we have the EKS control plane. Now, one good thing for using Fargate profile, as we know that it is always managed service. We do not need to think about that. What is the specification for the EC2 instances or the compute instance, basically, it should be. So it is being handled every time. But one more thing also, that what if you want to deploy multiple apps in a single cluster? So I repeat, multiple apps in a single cluster. It means that you have the cluster and you have the resources. Resources means what are the components under cluster. We have multiple pods running. Now, how we can play with it, that the pods actually contains the application. Okay, so and pods works under a namespace. If you don't mention any namespace, it will be considered as default namespace. But when you are actually trying to deploy multiple application, then all the application should be in separate namespaces. And when it is separate namespaces, we will be creating separate Fargate profile. So if I take you over here, you see that the Fargate profiles, currently we have one Fargate profile over here where our nginx namespace is there. So you can simply add Fargate profile, multiple Fargate profile, and create, and you can align this Fargate profile with separate namespaces. Suppose you have another namespace for app2. So you create a Fargate profile for app2 and your pod deployment for app2, it has that app2 namespace. Well, so I hope that you have got a very good idea starting from the beginning of every steps, and the troubleshooting part also I have mentioned over here. And don't forget to check the troubleshooting this documentation where we have all the frequently experienced error or issues drafted over here and very well documented. Here you see we have all the list of frequently experienced issues. If you experience any other issues during creation of this EKS cluster, um, this architecture basically, please feel free to share with us that error. I'll be happy to help you on this, and definitely we will create more troubleshooting documentation for the same. And I would request you that if you are interested in understanding EKS or AWS architecture to deploy large scale production ready EKS architecture and automating the architecture with IAC or infrastructure as code, like this CloudFormation or Terraform, you can contact us and book one-on-one meeting, as well as for any kind of cloud technical problem solving advice from subject matter experts. You can drop a note to contact us at e2esolutionarchitect.com, and we call it as a cloud architects helpline. And we have our website at e2esolutionarchitect.com. You can visit over there and you will be able to get our all the upcoming trainings from there. Thank you for your time. See you in our next session.